All right. All right. All right, so this is part 2 of a 4-part series of videos I'm doing on backpacking camera equipment. This second part, I'm going to talk a little bit more about cameras, about what I use currently, and about what I've used in the past, and kind of like some other gear that I throw into the mix from time to time. So I'm not going to waste any time. I'm just going to jump right in and show you guys what it is and how I use it. So I'm going to reference down to the table here. I got a ton of gear spread out here. So give me a second. Let me revamp my camera and zhuzh some things around, and I will show you what I'm talking about. All right, so I'm going to kind of start with smallest to biggest in the order of the way I'm going to go with this. So this camera right here, some of you may have seen this type of camera, some may not have. This is a 360 camera. You'll see it has 2 lenses on either side, and the cool thing about this camera is that it shoots 360 degrees all the time. It is a modular system, so it does have another lens. You can pop this one out and then it can kind of just be like a GoPro if you want it to be like that. This camera is really cool because you can mount this to any kind of GoPro mount or 1/4-inch thread mount and kind of just run and gun with this. I do like using this, and I will throw it in from time to time. It's great for like the walking down the trail shots, wide angle shots. You can get almost infinitely wide with this. It's just a really cool different perspective that you can add to your videos and photography for your trip videos. I haven't been bringing it as much because the workflow for it is a little bit clunkier. I kind of like just being able to bring my camera home, throw the files into Final Cut, and start editing. With this, I have to go through the Insta360 software. It'll stitch the files together because it actually shoots 2 spherical files for each side of the camera, and then it'll stitch those together, and then you bring that in. And then the cool thing is you can kind of like reframe the shot as you want to and that kind of thing. If you're interested in learning any more about 360 cameras, I would suggest going and looking at more in-depth reviews and tutorials on how to use these. It is really cool. There is a learning curve to it, or just use a GoPro for that kind of thing if that's more of your speed. That's also super, super interesting. So the cool thing with this is like you can mount this to the top of your trekking pole, which is normally what I'll do with it. And then that way you kind of have like a gimbal, a sense of a gimbal that you can kind of like walk around and you get like that first person view shot pretty quickly, pretty easily. But again, I've just stopped bringing this. It's just one more thing, one more battery to charge, one more thing to kind of go wrong or malfunction, or just one more thing to have to maintain, and then it's just one more piece of footage that you have to edit after the fact. But there's been some newer upgrades to the 360 cameras. This is the RS, this is the 1R. There is a 1RS now, and there's an X3, and there's a couple other things that just came out this year that are coming later this spring. So just something to keep in mind. So action cameras, 360 cameras, super useful, waterproof, that kind of thing. So again, for the point of view, for the first person kind of view shots, it's a really cool option to use, and small. The next option is the Canon M50, and there's also a newer version of this camera as well. It does have some limitations. It utilizes a smaller camera sensor, so it's not as good in low light. The stabilization isn't great on this. I just brought this camera on a trip recently to save weight again. that we went in the winter time. And so in the winter you have more gear, it's heavier. So in my mind, I was trying to save weight and space and that kind of thing. But the footage that I got from it, I really am not happy with. It's really shaky. It just doesn't have great stabilization. There is a newer version, a Mark II version of this camera that does, I believe, have better stabilization. It also shoots in 4K. This does not. It only shoots 1080, which is fine. Normally I shoot most of my backpacking in 1080, but I think it does shoot in 120 frames per second, which is slow motion for those who don't know that that's slow motion. But all in all, like, I really do like this camera, and I like the ecosystem that kind of goes along with it. This lens that is attached to it is a 22 millimeter. I believe it's a 2.8 aperture, I think. But I do have a couple other lenses, and they're small and they're lightweight. This is a 15 to 45, and then this was an 11 to 22. One thing with this camera is you can't, and again, I think you can with the newer version, but you cannot charge this battery via USB. You have to bring another battery. So that's another thing. And I have gone on trips, unfortunately, where I have forgotten to charge both batteries, where I thought I did and didn't. I've also, on this last winter trip, it's one more thing that you have to keep tabs on. You have to keep batteries warm when it's super cold. Temperatures got below freezing on this last trip, and I did have one battery succumb to the cold and was actually dead on me. Granted, it was the last day of the trip, so it didn't really matter a whole lot, but at the same time, I do like this camera. I really do. I kind of wish that I would have upgraded, or I want to upgrade, but again, when you talk about the camera that I've been using now compared to this, it's just a much better image quality and a better way of working. It's just, the R6 is just a better camera. So to compare the two, this is the R6, this is the M50. So you can see the size difference isn't really that comparable when you put it side by side. The M50 is much smaller, but again, you know, the R6 does basically everything that I want it to. It has better stabilization, it has a full frame, so it's great in low light. I like the camera, the lens options that I have for it. I just really enjoy bringing this camera, and for the weight, it's not like that much heavier. I mean, when you start getting into going ultra light and you're cutting grams and half ounces and that kind of thing, maybe that's a concern. But this is very small. I mean, as you can see, the difference in size, even putting like the bigger 11 to 22 millimeter lens on the front of this, it's really not that much bigger. To talk about weight specifically, the M50 without any of the lenses weighs 13.72 ounces. The R6 weighs 24.13, so that's about the difference of 10 ounces. So that being said, let's talk a little bit more about the R6. So this is in its current configuration. I do have another lens for this. It's a 16 millimeter. The 16 millimeter is really probably actually better for like that run and gun, like holding the camera and kind of getting the shot of your face, doing like the trip video type deal, where you're talking about different aspects of it. But the 16 millimeter is a 2.8, so you have a little bit of light loss there. It's not as fast of a lens, and there's no stabilization in the lens, and it's not a macro. So when you jump up to the 24 millimeter, it has stabilization. So you have stabilization in the camera, plus stabilization in the lens, plus it's a 1.8, plus it has macro. So you can get really close up if you find like cool nature stuff and you want to get a shot of like a mushroom or a leaf or a rock or something like that. You can get really close with this lens, and that's kind of cool. You can just add a lot more versatility with your B-roll and that kind of thing. I just kind of like the little bit of better quality than what you get with this. The lens did not come with a lens hood, so I did have to buy the lens hood separately, and the ND filter. This is an adjustable ND filter. What that allows you to do is shoot outdoors during the day at a 1.8 aperture, which gives you that like nice, pretty, blurry background. Again, this is what I use. This is what I've used in the past. This is kind of what works for me specifically. I've gone through multiple different versions of this stuff. Oh, the cool thing about this, I should mention, going back, another cool thing with the R6 is that you can charge this with a USB cable and a battery pack, so you don't have to bring an extra battery. But yeah, again, this is what works for me. What works for everybody else is going to be completely different. The 24mm lens weighs 9.8 ounces and the R6 weighs 24. So I think all in all, it's like 36 ounces or something like that, which is pretty significant. You know, I think it's like 2 pounds and some change. So I think it's like 2.2 pounds or something around there. So you just have to take that into consideration of like, do you want to carry that? It's basically like carrying an extra liter of water. So that's it for the camera gear that I use and that I've used in the past. So I appreciate it. Check out the microphone video coming up next if you guys want to check that out as well. Until next time, thanks guys. See ya.